Welcome to Shujin Academy VGM Club. I'm Professor Tom, your faculty sponsor. Today's opening track is Blue Water, Blue Sky, Maze Theme from Guilty Gear Double Cross for the arcade and PS2, composed by series mastermind Daisuke Ishiwatari. This song is chock full of the guitar wizardry that Ishiwatari is known for, but unlike most of the music for Guilty Gear, it's less focused on being badass and more focused on having a soaring good time. And that makes sense, because it's the theme for May, an adorable young pirate girl who fights with a giant anchor as a weapon. This is the fourth installment in my Rose-Colored Pixels series of episodes full of happy songs, and it's called Rainbows in Happyland because that's an appealingly ridiculous title. Also because I'm putting it out in June, and June is Pride Month, although that was not really intentional so much as it was just a fun coincidence. Anyway, we're going to start off our first block with Pacific from the Super NES version of Aerobiz, one of Koei's business management sim games about running your own airline. Wikipedia tells me that the composer for this game is Taku Iwasaki, who's done a lot more work in the world of anime than gaming. Iwasaki has actually teamed up with Persona rapper Lotus Juice for several anime songs, including tracks for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Soul Eater. Flying from the friendly skies into the courtroom, our second song is Maya Fei, Turnabout Sisters Theme 2002 from Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Justice for All for the DS, composed by Akemi Kimura. He's a Capcom veteran composer who's worked on Bayonetta as well as the Ace Attorney games, and this song is a fun theme for a character who's Phoenix Wright's main assistant. The block's third song comes from a game that takes place in 3D. It's Cruising Line from 3D OutRun, a port of Sega's classic arcade racer to the 3DS. 3D OutRun was part of a series of classic Sega Superscaler games that got ported to the 3DS with enhancements to give them 3D visuals, and many people consider this one of the best ports that OutRun has ever had. And that is saying something, considering the fact that OutRun has gotten at least 15 ports since starting out in the arcade. This song was not part of the original game. It was composed specifically for 3D OutRun by Manabu Namiki, who's mostly known for his work on bullet hell shooters. The research I did on him said that Namiki loves classic arcade games, and he created a worthy addition to one of the all-time great arcade soundtracks with this song, which fits right in with the original game's tunes. It's been a few episodes since we heard from composer Noriyuki Iwadare, who always gets his own special name pronunciation for some reason. The fourth song in our block is Main BGM from Parasol Stars, the story of Bobble 3 for the TurboGrafx 16, which was pretty early in Noriyuki Iwadare's career, but he turned in a perky, upbeat soundtrack for an absolutely adorable Technicolor game. Parasol Stars was released in 1991, and that's a nice transition into another game from 1991, Super Golf. A 1991 game with a title like Super Golf sounds like it was a Super Nintendo launch title, but this is actually a Game Gear game, so it's got the dulcet tones of the same Texas Instruments SN76489 sound chip that was used on the Sega Master System, along with multiple home computer platforms. I downloaded this soundtrack because it's a golf game, and those tend to have good soundtracks, and I was not disappointed. Expect to hear from it again someday when I inevitably make a third episode devoted to golf games. The mysterious unknown composer of this soundtrack is an unknown mystery, but a tip of my visor goes out to them for some excellent work. Finally in the block, we'll be hearing from another mystery composer with a song from Blackbird, Toritachi no Tooboe for the PC-98, an adult sci-fi dungeon crawler that's been featured on the show several times before. For today's visit to this soundtrack, we'll be hearing Eimi Restored. I have no idea what the context for this song is, and I'm not even sure if there's an English translation of this game that I could use to find out, but it sounds as perky as the bazongas on the game's bevy of busty beauties. Now, it's on to our smiley songs. Those songs were Pacific from the Super NES version of Aerobiz, Maya Fey, Turnabout Sisters Theme 2002 from Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Justice for All on the DS, Cruising Line from 3D OutRun for the 3DS, Main BGM from Parasol Stars for the TurboGrafx-16, and finally, Eimi Restored from Blackbird, Toritachi no Tooboe. Much like Blackbird Toritachi no Tooboe, the original Pokemon game for the Game Boy features menu-driven combat, and to start off our second block, we'll hear Victory vs. Gym Leader from Pokemon Red, and also Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Yellow for the Game Boy from composer Junichi Masuda. The surface-level appearance of Pokemon always feels very cheerful to me, although I know the narratives can go to some really weird and dark places, and that's before you factor in that the game is literally about people who train monsters to hurt one another. Much like Pokemon, the Persona games tend to revolve around recruiting monsters, and also some entries let you fight God, more or less. Also, both series tend to involve themes about the power of friendship, in between all the conflicts with the divine and the collection of monsters that sometimes resemble piles of garbage or Wang chariots. For our second song, we'll take a trip to spin-off game Persona Q for the 3DS with Corn Dog, composed by Persona's secondary series composer Atsushi Kitajoh. This is a great happy hangout track that feels like having fun with your friends. Much like Persona, the various Kunio-kun games revolve around a set of Japanese high school students, although Kunio and his pals tend to be dealing with somewhat lower stakes. We'll hear from an early entry in the Kunio-kun series with our block's third song, which is Menu from Downtown Nekatsu Story for the Japanese Famicom, or Street Gangs for the European Nintendo Entertainment System, or River City Ransom for the North American NES, which is my preferred title for the game. I have played this song before, sort of. I played the version from Game Boy Advance port River City Ransom EX back on episode 21, but for today, you'll get to hear composer Kazuo Sawa's original NES classic in its entirety. River City Ransom is the third game in the franchise, and we saw the first game in North America under the title of Renegade, while the second game was released over here as Super Dodgeball. Much like how Super Dodgeball is a competitive outdoor sport played outside on a divided court, Windjammers is a game that revolves around a competitive athletic competition contested on a separated playfield. Also, Super Dodgeball got a remake on the Neo Geo MVS system after its original 1987 arcade release, and Windjammers appeared on the Neo Geo MVS, although that was not a remake. I'm a big fan of Windjammers, which I found through the competitive fighting game scene, and I'm glad that after 60+ episodes, I've finally found a place for Windjammers on my show. The song is called You Gotta Power, Concrete Court, which is the theme for the game's Concrete Court stage, and it's from composers Seiichi Hamada and Tomoyoshi Sato, who both started their careers at Data East before moving on to other things. Much like how Windjammers is a game featuring tropical breezes and sunshine, Zoda's Revenge, Star Tropics 2, is a game that features tropical breezes and sunshine, at least in its starting area on the same Pacific island that served as the setting for Star Tropics 1. Well, it starts out tropical before all the time travel starts happening, because Zoda's Revenge is a game about traveling through time to stop an alien menace. Anyway, the happy little island village where the game starts has a happy little theme called Coral Cola Village, and it's a reworking of the song from the first Star Tropics. I chose this version over the original because it's just a little peppier. Zoda's Revenge was composed by original Star Tropics composer Yoshio Hirai alongside Takashi Kumegawa, and if those are not familiar names, it's because neither of them spent much time in the industry. Their combined credits on MobyGames.com total less than a dozen titles. Much like how the composers for Zoda's Revenge have a vanishingly small number of appearances in the wide world of VGM, Imi Shimizu is only credited as working on 6 games, and one of those is Side Pocket for the Sega Genesis, where Shimizu worked with the much more prolific Masaaki Iwasaki to craft one of that platform's best pool game soundtracks. We've heard from the Genesis version of Side Pocket 4 times before on this podcast, and we'll hear from it a 5th time for the 6th song in the second block with Fight It Out, which sounds quite pleasant and not like fighting at all. Much like how pool is played on a green surface and involves using a stick to hit balls into holes, golf is played on a green surface and involves using a stick to hit balls into holes. I played a cheerful song from a golf game for a handheld system in the first block, and I'm closing out this block with yet another handheld golf game track. This one will be BGM 16 from ESPN Final Round Golf 2002 for the Game Boy Advance. The 2002 in the title of this one accurately suggests that it was available for purchase in the year 2002, but it also inaccurately suggests that there were other ESPN Final Golf Round games available in different years, and that was not the case. Anyway, it has a fun soundtrack that nails that golf game feeling, and although composer information was a little challenging to track down, I believe this was composed by Hiroyuki Nakayama. Smile wide and prepare for a blast of happiness.
power, it's a piece of cake. Kitajoh!
Those songs were Victory vs. Gym Leader from Pokemon Red/Blue/Yellow, Corn Dog from Persona Q, Menu from River City Ransom for the NES, You Gotta Power Concrete Court from Windjammers, Coral Cola Village from Zoda's Revenge Star Tropics 2, Fight It Out from the Genesis version of Side Pocket, and finally, BGM 16 from ESPN Final Round Golf 2002. The following announcement has been paid for by the Shadowloo Department of Treasury and its glorious leader, General M. Bison.
Sure.
Welcome, Shujin Academy students. I'm your guest speaker, Red Mikano, Senior Executive Vice Senior President of Shadowloo's Department of Treasury, here to spread the use, acceptance, and might of the Bison Dollar. Now, I know what you're thinking. Every Bison Dollar is worth 5 British pounds, right? Wrong! But it's close. You see, the value of the Bison Dollar isn't dictated by which or how many members of the British royal family we kidnap. It's dictated by the state of the global economy, world-shifting events, financial forecasts. It's dictated by the way you spend your money, comrades. Now let's conclude today's lesson with a few global exchange rates, eh? First, we're going to start off with Great Britain, the pound sterling. This is the one everyone thinks is always 5 British pounds, which would be an exchange rate of 0.2. It's actually not that. It is currently sitting at 0.198, so a little bit lower than 0.2. The Bison Dollar isn't quite worth 5 British pounds, but it's close. Moving on, USD, American money, 0.147. The yen from Japan, 0.001, and the Canadian dollar, 0.106. And don't forget, you can stay up to date on the latest exchange rates by following How Much in Bison Dollars on most social media platforms at HMI Bison Dollars. A Gloria ad Pax Bisonica. Enjoy your day, comrades!
Now, back to the show. It's not an episode of Shujin Academy VGM Club without at least one song from one of my favorite franchises. Some days, you even get 2 songs from a franchise, and today is one of those days. I played a song from Persona Q earlier, and we're going to hear from Persona 5 to start off our third block with New Beginning. Like most of this soundtrack, it was composed by show favorite Shoji Meguro. Many modern cultures romanticize rural life, the honest labor of farming, open fields full of flowers, and green rolling hills, punctuated with occasional visits to a friendly village full of lovable and sometimes eccentric townfolk. Our second song captures this cottagecore vibe. It's Country Living from Breath of Fire 3 for the original PlayStation. This is a lovely song that's been featured on a few other VGM podcasts before, which is how I found it, and composer Akari Kaida is a Capcom veteran who's contributed to multiple games in the sprawling Mega Man franchise. She's also married to an Australian man, so sometimes you see her credited as Akari Groves or Akari Groves Kaida. To continue riding our cottagecore wave, our third song in our third block is Busy City Streets, the town theme from Dragon Quest II for the Super Famicom, composed by the incredibly important but also problematic Koichi Sugiyama. Dragon Quest II was originally released for the NES, although this version of the song is from a later port to the Super Famicom, which also included a version of the original Dragon Quest on the same cartridge. Dragon Quest II is a direct sequel set in the same world as the first game, and one of my favorite things about it is that the first game's map forms a portion of the second game's world map. Every song in this block is from a JRPG, depending on how broadly you define JRPG, and the fourth game featured actually has RPG in the title. We'll be hearing Let's Get Fluffy from Super Mario RPG for the Super Nintendo, composed by the great Yoko Shimomura. I've also seen this song credited as Let's Do the Fluff Fluff and Let's Do the Fooka-Fooka, because pieces of game music originally named in Japanese can get multiple titles when they're translated into English by different people. Regardless, this is a lovely upbeat track from a cloud-themed area in this classic game. For the penultimate song in the block, we'll hear from Pokemon Diamond and Pearl for the Nintendo DS with Pokemon Center Day. This song was composed by Junichi Masuda. We heard from his soundtrack for the original Pokemon Red and Blue a little earlier, and he's continued to contribute to Pokemon soundtracks even as he's taken on other duties in directing and producing games in the series. Finally, we'll end the block with the beautiful Bashfully Across the Ledge from Atelier Ryza, Ever Darkness and the Secret Hideout for the PlayStation 4, PC, and Nintendo Switch, composed by Kazuki Yanagawa. I've never made time to explore the sprawling Atelier series, but Kazuki Yanagawa has contributed to a whole bunch of them, and given how good Atelier Ryza's soundtrack is, I need to make time to hear more of his stuff. If you like this and want to dig deeper into these games, fellow VGM podcasters the Super Maricado Bros did a couple of episodes on this franchise, and I'll link to those in the show notes. Let's spend some time in a happy little JRPG town now, shall we? Those songs were New Beginning from Persona 5, Country Living from Breath of Fire 3, Busy City Streets from the Super Famicom version of Dragon Quest II, Let's Get Fluffy from the Super Nintendo version of Super Mario RPG, Pokemon Center Day from Pokemon Diamond/Pearl, and finally, Bashfully Across the Ledge from Atelier Ryza, Ever Darkness and the Secret Hideout. That's the show. If you want to reach me, I'm most active on Blue Sky as shujinacademy.bsky.social. You can also find me on Threads, Tumblr, or Instagram as Shujin Academy VGM Club. Episodes of the show are posted to my YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for Shujin Academy VGM Club. Other links are on my linktree at linktr.ee/Shujin Academy. Please leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're finding this episode. New episodes are released once or twice a month, depending on how often I get them done, and they premiere on Thursday mornings on your favorite podcatcher and 8beats.co, the internet's #1 game music radio station. My show is also featured on TerraPlayer, the cool app that's a destination for gaming podcasts and other content, so you can check me out there. If you're listening on Spotify, please be aware that they've pulled a few of my episodes before. There's a non-zero chance that they'll eventually pull my entire podcast, as they've done with a few other game music podcasts, so I'd strongly suggest you subscribe elsewhere to be sure you can get all the Professor Tom goodness you crave. Special thanks for this episode goes out to fellow VGM podcaster Jameson of Bar Silence Podcast for contributing cover art. You can and should find Bar Silence wherever you download podcasts, and check out his website at barsilence.com. Special thanks also goes out to today's show sponsor, the Shadaloo Department of Treasury, and their excellent PR campaign audio drama, How Much in Bison Dollars, where hosts Melody Sinclair and Department of Treasury Senior Executive Vice Senior President Red Mikano keep you informed about exchange rates and other current world events as they relate to the glorious nation of Shadaloo, and also they play music from fighting games. Esports correspondent Samson Escapades sounds a lot like me, so if you like the sound of my voice, you should check them out on your podcatcher of choice or on multiple socialist media platforms at HMI Bison Dollars. I've got one more song to play us out, and it's Sunny Skies from Final Fight 3 for the SNES, composed by Katsunori Kitajima. Appropriately enough, this is one of the game's ending themes, and I hope you're hearing it as you watch the sunrise after restoring peace to the city or something awesome like that. Thank you for listening. I'm Professor Tom, and I'll see you next time on Shujin Academy VGM Club.